there is bipartisan support now to defend Taiwan. I actually think that that is in the cards. I think there's a very high probability that we actually end up in a war with China.
Really?
I don't know when. This century. Oh, yeah.
I don't think so.
I think Taiwan's the biggest flashpoint in the world.
I would agree with that. But explain why you think there's going to be a war. Because I think a lot of people think there's way too much at stake here for there to be a war. So there is going to be some sort of negotiated settlement in the South China Sea. So why would you think the majority case is there's going to be a war? Really?
You have to look at it, first of all, from the Chinese point of view. They view Taiwan as sacred territory. And for decades now, they have said in every single meeting, diplomatic meeting with the U.S., Taiwan is always their number one issue. They are hell-bent on the reunification of mainland China with Taiwan, and they would like to do it peacefully through coercion if they can, but I think they will do it militarily if they must. And the only question is when they feel that they will be strong enough to basically take the island by force. So that's, I think, the Chinese point of view, and I think America is increasingly committed to the defense of Taiwan. So, we have contradictory statements on this. The One China policy says that we respect that there's one China, but on the other hand, the Taiwan Relations Act commits us to help in the defense of Taiwan. Yeah. So we have a contradictory policy on this, but if you really want to understand—
And by the way, as does Sachs, you would agree, China has flip-flopped on this. I mean, it's only the last 100 years that they've really considered Taiwan strategic. They didn't care about it 200 or 300 years ago. They were kind of like, this is worthless. You guys do what you want.
Because Taiwan was part of China until 1895 when Japan took it from them.
Yeah.
But they
didn't want it at that time. That's the other thing. They were like, this is worthless real estate. We don't care.
No, that's not true.
Well,
Taiwan is extremely important strategically. And if you want to understand why, I think you need to look at this map.
Yes. I read up on that. I think it's really interesting.
Can we pull that up, actually?
Yeah, it's a really interesting discussion because 200 years ago, they didn't care. And then all of a sudden, they were like, wait a second, if we're going to be in wars with the West and Japan's going to be a democracy, we do actually have something at stake here. We'd like that island back.
The island chain strategy was originally created by John Foster Dulles, one of the Secretary of State, I think, under Eisenhower, who was one of the initial architects of our containment policy against the Soviet Union, but also came with this idea of how we would contain China in East Asia. And the basic idea is that China is surrounded by a series of island chains. The first island chain goes down from the southern tip of Japan to Okinawa to Taiwan to, I think there's some islands in the South China Sea, the Spratly Islands. It's got the northwest tip of the Philippines. That's the first island chain. Second island chain goes out to
Vietnam,
the eastern part of the Philippines. No, Vietnam's all the way down in South China Sea.
I see what you're saying.
But I think the second island chain includes, goes down to Indonesia. And then I think there's even a third island chain that includes Guam, although Guam actually might be in the second somewhere. It's somewhere around there. It's a heavily fortified American base. So the idea is if you want to bottle up and contain China, you do it by controlling these island chains. And Taiwan is really the central one. It sort of divides this East China Sea where you've got South Korea and Japan from the South China Sea where you've got Vietnam and Malaysia.
Equidistant between Vietnam and Japan. It's literally, if you were to draw a center line of China's coastal access, that is it.
Yeah. So the bottom line is this. If you want to pursue a policy of containment against China, you really want to control these island chains. Another way to think about it is that these islands are unsinkable aircraft carriers. They allow America to project power 6,000 miles away into the Pacific. That's how we saw it during World War II, is we had all these island-hopping battles, and as we took these islands, they would then become a runway for the next stage to project American power to get all the way to Japan. So, if you believe that we're headed for, or we already are in Cold War II with China, and I think we are. I think China is really the geopolitical threat, not Russia. The way that you would contain China and keep them bottled up is to have these islands in the American alliance. It's going to be very hard for China, which is now building a huge blue water navy, has actually more ships than the United States. It's going to be very hard for them to project their power all over the world if they are contained and bottled up and have to watch their own backs.
One note on the number of ships, though,
in East Asia
is, they have a lot of small ships. The tonnage-wise, we have much more tonnage. And if you were to look, even the perfect setup, as you explained through these islands, is very similar to NATO and the what's happening with Russia. We have Korea, we have Japan, we have Vietnam, the Philippines. We have an incredible alliance in this area. And that's a great thing for America. And Taiwan obviously is a jump ball here. But this is a setup for China, having...
Jason, what do you think about the repercussions of her visit? So CATL, which is Tesla's biggest battery supplier, basically, delayed the announcement of a factory. It's not clear whether they're going to put it into the United States. They may actually pick a city in Mexico. But the decision that was supposed to happen now has now been delayed until September or October. There's a bunch of, there's all of these crazy military drills that happened. Was it all worth it?
I mean, that is the question. I'm asking why you, now?
Was it worth it?
We don't have enough information, I think, to know why this was done now. Was it a freelance offer? Hold on. He asked me a question. Let me finish. Is it a freelance, and Nancy Pelosi is completely freelance, or is there a bigger strategy here is the question. Is China weak now? Are we trying to send a message to them? And one could equally take the side of the argument that the United States supporting Finland, supporting Sweden, supporting NATO, supporting the Ukraine and supporting the Pacific is actually the right move here to contain the dictators.
I agree, but we have two people to do that. It's the president and the Secretary of State.
Well, that would be a much bigger provocation, I think, is the issue. So if you sent the president, that would be a very big provocation.
The Thomas Friedman article that Sachs mentions was pretty explicit that, Blinken and Biden both told her, please stand down.
Yeah.
The NSC and the Joint Chiefs said, please stand down. You are way over your ski tips here. And she's still did.
I agree. I've been very public. What is the point of doing this now is the question. And we don't have information.
Once China tried to dictate to Pelosi that she couldn't go, of course we had to back her play, but you have to be kind of a fool to fall for this in the first place. This was self-indulgent by Pelosi. She didn't need to pick this battle. The administration asked her not to. And look, let me give Biden some credit here. Biden has the right policy on Taiwan, which was stated this way. He says that we support the status quo and we are against unilateral changes to the status quo. We want the United States to be a status quo power with respect to Taiwan and force China to be the revisionist power. And we need to be very careful that we do not come across as the revisionist power. That would give China an excuse. So we want to just maintain the status quo. That should be our policy.